Yes, thank you. Okay. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to Summering on the Mount Missionary Baptist Church Sunday School. This October 12th. And our lesson today is from Acts chapter 4, verse 32 through Acts 5:11. And our lesson is God's. We're on page 25. I don't know how I got to 29. Oh, that's next week. The 12th is next week. Oh. Oh, okay. That's why I got all these marks and writing in here. Oh. Yeah. God warns Pharaoh through dream. Okay. One of the things I want to make important in this lesson is two words: land and plans. Lands and plans. And you follow with me through the lesson. It says, and we're talking about dreams, but it says not every dream was considered significant. But as we see in Joseph's story, when people sense a supernatural element in a dream, they saw its meaning. And I don't know about you, but I grew up in a community that played a lot of numbers. Those that don't know what numbers are, that's just what it says. It's a small lotto. And you get a number. Monday the guy come by and pick up your number, record your number, and you bet $2, $3, $4, $5 on that number. And supposedly when that number win, they give you whatever that's worth. But a lot of people, a lot of the seniors in my day and time, they would have a number, and that number would be correlated to a dream. And they had this dream book. And when you had a dream and a guy come by and ask you, well, he said, well, I don't have a number. Did you have a dream last night? A vision or something? And then they would give you some elements out of that dream, and then the guy will give you a number associated with that. As it says, dream interpretation was such a big deal that the Egyptians compiled books for deciphering the meanings of each dream component. And there's one book, it says the document contained a list of dream components, labeling each one good or bad, along with suggested meanings. And that is where the cup. Now, you have to understand a lot of, as it says here, we have this, and some people assume that it's not a conversation. Yeah, let's say a conversation with God in a vision state. So they consider dreams very, very important, you know. Because I remember they had this book, and you go by and say, well, when you going to do anything today, I'm going to say Miss Jones, and no relations to. no intention meant. And she said, no. And he said, well, did you dream? And she said, yeah. And then, well, tell me your dream. And then he'd be flipping the pages in his book. And so he said, okay, that's number 6, you know. And that's something good. And then that's number 3. And then that's number 4. And so he give you a number and you play that number. If 634 come in at the end of the day, then you win whatever the number was for the day, depending on how many people had played. So dreams, not only in Joseph's time, but in our times, are important. And another thing it says about the situation that happened between Pharaoh and Joseph. It says, Joseph made it clear to Pharaoh that his dreams had not come from one of the Egyptians' God, but from the one and only God. And that's important, because all the things that happened, there was always separating the gods and the wise people from one another, and they were always coming up against our God. Okay? And one thing Joseph had to tell Pharaoh, that the 2 dreams was really one dream. And that's important, because they had the same meaning. Although they were different elements, it had the same meaning. All right? It says Pharaoh's dream involved 2 sets of 7, and 2 sets of kine, and 2 sets of 7 ears of wheat. In each case, the first set was plump, and you can see in the second set wasn't. So it's here, God is telling Pharaoh, okay, this is what I'm going to do to you, but here's the way in which you can not have this happen to you. As grievous as I'm going to do it. And the Egyptians and a lot of foreign cultures at that time believed heavily in gods. And when you talk about famines, and that's one of the things that the first century people were really familiar with, was famine, because they were, first of all, we have to understand geographics, is that this was in the desert region. I'm sorry, not the desert region. Yeah, it's right below in the Nile. The desert region, and that was a low rain part of the region. So you didn't get a lot of rain anyway. And so there's going to be famine, you know. I know none of us was here, thank God, during the Dust Bowl, during the 28 and 29, when they didn't have any water and rain in the Midwest, and wasn't nothing growing. Matter of fact, all that culminated together, the Dust Bowl and stock market crash. Yeah. So that was a famine there. But the reason I asked you to put down the 2 words, land and plan, and on page 26, it says, notice the emphasis Joseph placed on land in a second telling of the interpretation. Now, land is very important, because that's something that, as you can understand, the Israelites are very keen on, because that's something they never had. They came out of slavery, went through the years in the desert, and they have yet to have any land. They don't have anything. So Joseph is emphasizing that to the king. It says, repeating the terms 4 times in 3 verses. And you may see it as a different word, earth or ground is translated depending on the context. It says here, I'm on the bottom of 26. That God had to, due to Adam's sin, he had to destroy the earth, God did, because of the rampant wickedness. And he did it again with Sodom and Gomorrah. And we see that one of the things is God has put man on to take care of the land is one thing that man is not taking care of, and so God is destroying it. You know, that's just like we do to some of them little bad children, you know. You buy them something, you know, and they don't take care of it, so you take it away from them, you know. But you have to understand that throughout Genesis, we see God's plan unfold to restore the land to its original purpose. And so when man is messing up the land and defiling it and one thing and another, God takes it back and says, okay, I need to restore it to what I meant it to be. And say, God promised never again to destroy the whole earth by water, and promised to give Abraham's descendant a land that will become the focal point of redemptive work. Now I like that statement there because God got to have some place to do what he needs to do. So his plan is, I know that the people are not on the same page that I'm on, and they're going to sin, and they're going to mess up. So let me have a place where I can have a laboratory, so to speak, or some place where I can work with them, you know. Because I was thinking about that the other day. If you want to do contact with people, personal contact, then you need some place where you can have that meeting with that person or that entity. And so God said, okay, well, I got my people down there. I created them. Now I put the land down there. Now I got everything working. But oops, they're not holding true. So I'm blessing them. And they never had this amount of anything. I've given them control over everything on the earth. And yet now they still are not walking according to my wishes and desires. And so God keep, oh, that's a grandson. So this points to God's plan, but it also points to how God has already started working by equipping Joseph with the wisdom to be able to handle what God has given him. You know, because here Joseph is just an ordinary man and person until God gives them the ability to be able to understand visions and dreams. Okay. So as we said, that was two interpretations of the same dream. The difficulty with the first interpretation is that it seemed unlikely. 1/5 is something we have to think about of the grain from the first 7 years would be enough to feed both Egypt and all the surrounding nations for the next 7 years. It also seemed to conflict with the directive to collect all the food of the good years in verse 35. So in one verse it says collect 1/5, and then in the other one it says collect all the food. So that's one of the conflicts. And so I would go with the 1/5, the way they explain it in the book. The 1/5 makes sense because it's not saying take 1/5 of the crop. It's saying this is something that happened in this section, something happened in this section, then you take that. For instance, if you're setting up a business or something, then you think about the administrative aspects, you think about the financial aspects, and you think about the structure. So each one would have its part, 1/3, but that has to all come together to make a total. So that's what they talk about here when they say 1/5. It's not take 1/5 of what you produce, but in that section, if that's 1/5 of your total, then take that section. So, so that was in the first one. It says in the second one, God revealed the extent of the famine devastation. The prior years of plenty would be forgotten. The famine would consume or destroy the land. It would make the years of plenty unknown, removing every shred of evidence that the land had ever produced abundantly. And it would be very grievous. And that's a hard famine. When it's just going to come by and wipe out everything, you can't see any evidence of what happened before. So it's not just crops are not going to grow. Is that the ground is not going to be reproductive at all. You know. So we notice that the land is very important in this dream as far as Joseph is talking to Pharaoh, and also that the land is important to Pharaoh because he's a king, and his kingdom is dependent upon how much land he has and what's in that land. And so that's why I pulled out land as being important. Why I pulled out land as being as important. On page 26 is notice the emphasis Joseph placed on land at the bottom in the first paragraph. In this second tell of the interpretation. And it talks about how the translation of land either is ground or earth, depending on the context, is a prominent theme in Genesis. As God created and filled the earth, commissioned Adam and Eve to have dominion over the earth. But then cursed the ground in different words, but similar concept because of Adam's sin and had to destroy the earth because of rampant wickedness. So he give, it's saying he give Adam and Eve all this land with all this on it, but then he takes it from them, And that's the thing. And it says, okay, let's move on. Move on to Joseph's wisdom on page 26. And it says, in verse 33 and 36 of Genesis 41. Now, that's a chapter in Genesis you must read. If you read chapter 1 and 2, then you actually need to go to 41 and read what's in 41, because it kind of culminates everything for you and bring everything together. And because there's so much happening in Genesis. We have the tendency to stop after Genesis 2, you know, because that's the creation, and we get all inside euphoric and feeling all good because we've been created and everything else is created. But you have to move on through the rest of Genesis from 1 to 41 to really see what's happening. Genesis is, you know, that's like the trailers that they put out for the movies, you know, and you can see what's in the trailer, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't see the movie, that's just a figment of your imagination. And like we talk about now, Joseph's wisdom, well, Joseph is wise because he has the wisdom of God. And Pharaoh not understanding that. But you remember when we said back earlier that Joseph made it clear to Pharaoh that this dream was not from one of his gods, but from the one and only God, and sent it to reveal something significant to Pharaoh. Not the gods that you're talking about, the God of the corn and the rain, and we're talking about the God of gods, amen? Okay. So we're still on page 26, and we're talking about Joseph's wisdom. And that's something we have to talk about because it was and one of the things you have to understand, understanding Joseph and Daniel, is that their wisdom is something that they don't go out and obtain it or ask for it, that it just comes up on them, you know. And that's one thing we have to understand, because you hear people search some time and long and get despondent because they don't get the answers to those prayers, or maybe get the answers to something that you really want to happen. But the thing about it is, you're looking for a physical manifestation of what you think. Yeah, now it could be in a different form. Because I know I was thinking about a lot of things, and I said, you know, I was looking for a donor, you know, because my previous wife was needed a heart and a kidney, and that was difficult because when you're on 2 transplant lists. But looking for, I think I've said this before, looking for a donor. But in the midst of the time, then other things fell into place. And one thing that I realized later on is that the provisions was there for her to have a better quality of life, you know. And at that time, that's more important. You know what I mean? I won't say more important, but that's something we have to understand. And the donor prospect never did happen, but things got easy for me and for her along the way, you know. This person came out of the woodwork and donated this or suggested this or made a way for us to be able to be available to this, you know. So a lot of times we look for things and they don't come in the shape and form and fashion we want them to. But and Joseph here has this ability, which is given him by God, understandably, you know. And it's like I said, when he was in jail the first time, and he was talking to the cupbearer and I forget the other guy that was there, and it wasn't something that he did extravagantly. It's something that he did on the ordinary, you know. He would tell people about their visions and their dreams. And so that brought him that part, not that part. That brought him that identity of having wisdom, a different wisdom, you know. So it says, and he had that wisdom, and it's funny because we've all seen it, and we've been around people that have that extra thing, you know, that extra thing. And when you're around them people, you just relax and you're comfortable. And you know that it was a relaxing and comfortable situation because the cupbearer understood what Joseph had. And those in the prison understood what Joseph had, and they treated him differently. So, and now when it comes the time for interpreting the vision of Pharaoh, he not only interprets it, but he gives him a solution for it. Well, what happened? Like it said, when I'm not issuing you a warning. This is not a warning. This is just identification of what's going to happen. But here's what you can do. Mm-hmm. During those 7 years, you can take and store up the grain, put the grain to use. And then the next 7 years, you'll be able to use it. But, as it says, Joseph proposed a plan that would spare the land from its coming devastation. The proposal included 2 steps. First, Pharaoh would need to appoint numerous overseers, including a right-hand man he could set over the land of Egypt. To qualify for such vast responsibility, the second in command would need to be discreet and wise. There may be a hint of irony here, because Pharaoh leading advisors were called wise men. But they could not even tell Pharaoh the meaning of his dreams, let alone come up with a solution. Pharaoh would quickly recognize Joseph as a clear choice for the job. So, and that's something. You writing a job specs and, couldn't nobody else, do the job but you. You know what I mean? And so that's how Joseph came to be, second in command of Egypt. And so that's what led his family back to him, because he was in charge of the grain, and so they had to come back. It says, Joseph's wise response, I'm on 27, will save Egypt and the surrounding nations. That includes Joseph's own family in Canaan. Though Joseph's enslavement and imprisonment, God had prepared a way for God's chosen family, and thus the lineage of the coming Savior to survive. So that's where the word plan comes into effect. God is planning all this out. Yes, I'm going to send a famine in the land, but I can't have this famine wipe out all the Canaanites and those people that live in Canaan, because that's my chosen people. I have to have them continue because it's a bloodline for my son. And that's what it says. It says through Joseph's enslavement, because his brothers sold him, remember? And imprisonment, and he just was destined to be in prison. God has prepared a way for his chosen family, and thus the lineage of the coming Savior. You should highlight that and underline that, And that's one of the things that, to me, that this quarter the lessons are bringing out. Things that we don't think of, things that happened beforehand, and we don't really take that into consideration, It's just like when we make plans for the church, and that's what happened to us for the picnic. When we plan for everything else, but we don't plan for the end, and that's a bad thing. Here, we just have to be amazed at how God has planned all this out to perfection. It's working out the way he planned it out, and that's a good thing, So, we wanted to take, we wanted to take just one research and discussion topic and talk about it. So let's do it. Let's go to page 28, research and discussion. Did we not select number 1? Research and discussion, not practical points. Research and discussion, we selected number 1. All right, so we're going to talk about number 1 for the remainder of the time. I'll read that. Does God still speak to people through dreams today? What caution should we take when someone claims he hear a message directly from God? So the first part is, do you think God still speaks to people through dreams? Yes, okay, so we will understand that as yes, because God is never changing. He's always the same. What caution should we take when someone claims to hear a message directly from God? I think the word directly is something that bothers me. If a person say, I heard this from God, well, but you only heard a small portion of it.
And I would take it with a grain of salt.
You didn't hear all of it.
I would take it with a grain of salt, because God speaks to us, to me all the time. So if he...
But when you say us, who is your us?
Believers.
Okay.
Believers, because we know him.
Correct.
But if he told you this, is there a reason why he didn't tell me when he speaks to me all the time?
Yeah.
So that's why I would say, my response would be okay. Okay, because I'm not really trusting that. It may be true.
Mm-hmm.
It may be true. But I'm gonna wait for him to tell me.
And
because I don't know what your motives are behind that. Why are you telling me that? What makes you think I need to know that? What is the reason behind you telling me that?
And that's what I think is the pressing point. What is your motives behind that? And what bothers me is that it's always delivered in an inappropriate time and place. You're going to tell me something about what I need to do. Right now, I'm in the middle of a worship service. You know what I mean? Or my brain is not in that area. You know what I mean? Not saying you didn't hear, because God speaks to all his people, but yeah. And I just hate it when somebody bum rush you and tell you, blue, blue, blue. You can't do that. I'm in communication with God every day in my own way. So you mean to tell me God don't like me about me? Yeah. So I don't know. I think that should be caution because we know that Satan has his way of working as well. And, you know, he comes up with all these tricks and sly way to do things, you know. So, but I just think that if it's out of a religious atmosphere, then you don't receive it. You know what I mean? Because you can't, I'm walking down the street, and you can't just run up to me and tell me something very religious. You know what I mean?
But on that same note, God, you know, just like your relationship with God, how we communicate with Him, and sometimes God will confirm what He said through someone, and the confirmation. You already know what God said to you.
And I agree. There's a confirmation on some things.
On some things, yeah, not
You know,
near.
But I just think it's a manner of delivery that bothers
Yeah.
me. You know, and it's just a manner.
Yeah.
Who brings it and how it's brought.
Right. What's the motive,
You
like
know.
she said?
And then if you're telling me something I ain't even got in my brain, that
Right.
really,
Right.
you know, if I'm having my conversation with God, God don't tell me this, then, you know, next week I'll come up and you going to run up and tell me this. You
Right.
know, hard for us to understand after all, because we still all got our little sin thing running through us.
Yeah.
And so it says, what caution should we take when someone claims to have heard a message directly from God? Just cautiousness is enough right there. You know, be cautious. First of all, you got to see how it fit in the Word. And first of all, then you have to see how you fit within that interpretation of the Word. And it says on the same page, 28, first God communicated through the dreams of Pharaoh. And then Joseph explained Pharaoh the dream. And God had revealed himself through the pagan king through Joseph. So, you know, I just think it's just a way, then too, you have to understand what kind of way have you developed in your communication with God. You know, if I know that I'm talking to God and in that talk, then God have a way of communicating with me. You know, I don't see him going outside of our communication time, you know, to tell me something. But I think that might be the problem. A lot of people don't have a communication time. You know what I mean? That time where, I think it's a time where you just sit down and don't say nothing. You know, you shut your mouth and listen, you know. And then that way you have the opportunity to hear. Because, like I tell people, you know, that voice, if you're not really listening for God's voice,
You're not going to hear it.
it's gone. It's gone. So you have to sit and be ready for it. Any more comments on number one? All right, well, let's just do our practical points then while we're on the page. All right, number 2. Natural disasters like famines show that the earth still suffers under the curse of sin. That's a difficult one because, you know, was the original sin of Adam, it was washed away by the death of Christ, right? So we shouldn't be under that original sin, should we not? Or we just under the curse of sin, period?
We're under the curse of sin, period. Sin doesn't have a timeline. It just, as long as we're in this earthly body, we will forever sin, whether in thought or deed. And the most important, we have to repent and not repeat.
That's a good one. Repent and not repeat. Yeah, and that's ever so important. And so I think you hit it. I think that sin is ever present and going to be present, you know. And so the earth still suffers under the curse of sin. Because we have all the necessary tools to take ourselves out of the area of sin through Christ. All right, let's go to number 5. It says, God has given humans the responsibility of caring for the earth. That's a gimmick, because he has. And everybody understands that. But I think the thing is just, how do we understand our caring for the earth? You know, it's unfortunate that we as humans, when we think about doing something, we put a price tag on it.
It's important. The money factor causes a lot of the destruction. You want to tear down forests. You want to eliminate organizations who maintain, that's their primary job, to maintain what God has given us. But you take them away, so there's no one to be accountable for maintaining what God has given us.
And so you open that up and saying we have to maintain the responsibility which God has given us, right?
Yes.
And so in order to do that, we have to be within the system that is productive for us, and that's the world system. And the world system deals in money. And because we have the words for today are plan and land. And right now, looking at a lot of surveys and listening to a lot of poll results, we are really losing a lot of land, you know. And so we don't have a plan to stop the loss of land, because we don't even have a plan for air. So you know we don't have a plan for land. So our caring for the earth puts us in the area where we have to do what is necessary to maintain. So if we have to, you take like the rainforest, if we have to clear out land to provide space for, I think they're drilling oil and stuff. By clearing out that land, then that's going to get rid of a lot of animal species. Then where are we? We have to do what we have to do in order to live. We don't have any more room. You're taking some parts of over there by Tonga and Tahiti and those islands. Those are low-lying islands, and they're flooding. Absolutely. They're flooding. And so how do we go about, you know, helping them, and how do we go about maintaining the land, you know, without putting in money and building big old retaining walls or some kind of structure, you know. So that's a difficult thing. We have to understand our responsibility in maintaining this earth.
You know, and I often think about the homes and rental patos verdes. Those homes, certain places are not intended to be built because of the land.
Yes.
So it can't ever be repaired because it's continuously falling. And you know, I say all the time, I'm gonna stay in the hood, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because if my neighbor house get on fire, we can save mine. I go way out to get away from everybody else, and our houses are far apart from each other. One catch on fire, they all catch on fire. Same thing with the floods. One did damage, but down here in the hood, we good. We good. So you have to actually look at the land, how it's structured, what it was intended for. A lot of that land was intended for the wildlife, so it can continue to reproduce. But you want to let money come into the factor, and I got this amount of money, so oh yeah, you can build a house. But you know that's not where that house is supposed to be. It may not be your generation, but that next generation, it may be gone because it wasn't intended for that.
Yeah.
So we need to stop letting that money buy our land away that is not intended for that. Where is our wildlife going? They got to come where you are because their homes are gone. Money is the root of all evil. Yeah, it is.
The verse says, the love of money. Yeah. The love of money. Yeah. So, but, and I do agree with that, but where do you go? You know, you got your wants on one end and your desires on the other end. You know, so if we want to have areas where we can live comfortably and peacefully, then we will come up with systems that are, what's now the optic word today is what? Stability? What's it? Yeah, anything around stability, stabilizing or whatever. But yeah, I think that just like with developing something, you have to get a lot of like-minded people together. So you're correct about Palos Verdes in that area. You know, my thing is, if you're going to make Florida put everything on stilts that's close to the water, then what's the difference here? You know, you have a geological situation where it's unsafe and there's no telling, no rhyme or reason when anything could happen because you're dealing with Mother Nature, the earth. I mean, you're dealing with earth. I don't know. Which, huh? Well, that's just like once you start your educational conquest, then you start out in one area, but as you go on, this opens up, that opens up. What used to be, you had one solid intent on your degree. Now you have so many minors, you know. I didn't hear nothing you said. You had to come up here. You know I can't hear you. righty. Well, that'll do for our lesson for today. Yeah, I was over in next week. God sees our heart. Yeah, I'm excited about that. Okay, so let's go over to page 33, and pick out some practical points. Any suggestions? One, it says Christian communities can be a welcome relief for those who have only experienced the loneliness of an individualistic culture. Yeah. Number one. I like number three in comparison to that. The righteous action of one believer can set a pattern for others to follow. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do 1 and 3 practical points. All right, let's move down to our research and discussion. Some serious situations. I think we're forced to go with number 5. How can the sinful action of a church member be damaging to the church? First, we have to classify it as sinful as far as the church. That means we've got to break out the bylaws and the Constitution and all. And now we're going to make everybody mad. All right, so we got number 5, correct? Research and discussion. All right. If nothing else, then we're going to conclude that part of our Sunday school with practical points 1 and 3 and research and discussion number 5. All righty. We got a good subject next week. All right. God sees our heart. Okay, that'll end our practical part of it. Now we'll go with our collection.